Money can buy empires. It can buy silence. But Arthur Sterling, the man who owned half of Silicon Valley, learned the hard way that it cannot buy a voice. For 3 years, his daughter, Patrick, hadn't uttered a single syllable. 20 of the world's most renowned neurologists and psychiatrists had tried to break the silence. 20 had failed. Tonight, inside the gilded walls of the Sterling Manor, the 21st Doctor was about to try a radical new procedure in front of a live audience. Everyone was watching the Billionaire and the Doctor. No one was watching the trembling waitress in the corner, or the terrifying secret she was hiding in her apron pocket. A secret that would cost someone their life. The crystal ballroom of the Sterling estate in Scarsdale, New York, didn't smell like a home. It smelled like ambition, chilled lilies, and fear. Mia Calloway adjusted her black bow tie, the fabric scratching against her neck. She was 24, invisible, and currently holding a tray of hors d'oeuvres that cost more than her rent for the last 6 months. She wasn't supposed to be here. The catering company, Elite Service, usually required background checks that took weeks, but someone had called in sick with the flu, and Mia needed the money. Her landlord had slipped a final notice under her door that morning. "Keep your head down, eyes on the glasses," the floor manager, a man named Henderson with a clipboard permanently glued to his hand, hissed at her. "Mr. Sterling is in a mood. If you drop so much as a crumb, you're not just fired, you're blacklisted." Mia nodded, gripping the silver tray tighter. "Understood." She moved into the crowd. The room was a sea of tuxedos and designer gowns. This wasn't a party, it was a viewing. Arthur Sterling, the CEO of Sterling Aero, had turned his daughter's recovery into a spectator sport. It was grotesque. In the center of the room, on a raised platform usually reserved for a string quartet, sat a girl, Patrick Sterling, 19 years old, the heiress to a $4 billion fortune. She sat in a velvet armchair, looking less like a person and more like a porcelain doll that had been glued back together. Her pale blonde hair was styled to perfection. Her dress was a shimmering silver Givenchy. But her eyes... Mia froze when she saw them. Patrick's eyes were dead. Not blind, just empty. A void where a soul used to be. "Sad, isn't it?" Mia flinched. A guest, an older woman dripping in emeralds, reached for a glass of champagne from Mia's tray. 3 years, the woman whispered to her companion, ignoring Mia's presence entirely. Since the accident in the Swiss Alps, they say she screamed so hard when the car went off the cliff that she tore her vocal cords. But the doctors say the cords healed years ago. It's all in her head now. Psychogenic mutism. "Arthur is desperate," the companion replied, sipping his drink. "Stock prices dip every time the press mentions the invalid heir. He needs her to speak tonight. That's why he flew in Dr. Thorne." Mia moved away, her heart thumping, an erratic rhythm against her ribs. She knew the official story. Everyone did. The accident. Patrick Sterling and her mother driving on an icy road. The mother died. Patrick survived but never spoke again. But as Mia weaved through the crowd, she felt a strange, magnetic pull toward the stage. She didn't know these people. She was from the other side of the tracks in Yonkers. Yet, looking at Patrick, Mia felt a cold prickle of déjà vu. She knew that posture. The way Patrick held her left wrist with her right hand, rubbing the bone repeatedly. It was a self-soothing tick. Where have I seen that before? Mia thought, her mind racing back through her own chaotic past. Suddenly, the lights in the ballroom dimmed. A spotlight, harsh and blinding, cut through the darkness and pinned Patrick to her chair. She didn't blink. She didn't shield her eyes. She just stared into the abyss. Arthur Sterling stepped into the light. He was a handsome man in a predatory way, sharp jaw, silver fox hair, and a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ladies and gentlemen," Arthur's voice boomed without a microphone, projected by pure authority. "Thank you for joining us on this momentous evening. As you know, the Sterling family has faced tragedy, but we Sterlings do not accept defeat. We conquer it." Polite applause rippled through the room. It sounded like rain on a tin roof. "Tonight," Arthur continued, gesturing to the wings, "we welcome Dr. Julian Thorne, the man who woke the Crown Prince of Dubai from a coma, the man who claims he can unlock my daughter's voice." Mia watched from the shadows near the kitchen entrance. A tall man with slicked-back dark hair and rimless glasses walked onto the stage. He carried a small black medical bag. He looked less like a doctor and more like a magician about to saw a woman in half. This was Dr. Thorne, the 21st Doctor. Mia felt a sudden wave of nausea. She looked down at her hands. They were shaking. Why was she so terrified? It was just a rich girl getting medical treatment. But then, Patrick looked up. For a split second, the spotlight flared, and Patrick's gaze scanned the crowd. It passed over the billionaires, the socialites, the press, and locked directly onto Mia. Patrick's eyes widened. The emptiness vanished, replaced by sheer, unadulterated terror. Her mouth opened, a silent scream forming on her lips, but no sound came out. She began to shake violently. Mia dropped the tray. Crash! The sound of 30 crystal champagne flutes shattering against the marble floor echoed like a gunshot. The entire room went silent. Arthur Sterling stopped mid-sentence. Dr. Thorne froze. 300 heads turned to look at the waitress standing in a pool of broken glass and expensive alcohol. "Get her out of here," Arthur Sterling snarled, his composure cracking for the first time. 2 security guards started moving toward Mia, but Mia couldn't move. She wasn't looking at Arthur. She was looking at Patrick. Because Mia remembered. It hit her like a physical blow. The summer of 2019. Camp Silver Lake, the charity camp where rich kids were sent to build character and poor kids were sent on scholarship. Mia had been a counselor. Patrick had been a camper, a shy, sweet girl who loved to sing. And Mia remembered the other girl, the one who didn't come home. "I know you," Mia whispered, though no one could hear her over the rushing footsteps of security. Patrick was shaking her head frantically at Mia. "Don't!" her eyes screamed. "Run!" But Mia didn't run. She watched as Dr. Thorne approached the terrified girl, pulling a syringe filled with a translucent orange liquid from his bag. "It's just a mild sedative to lower her inhibitions, Arthur," Dr. Thorne announced to the room, ignoring the commotion with the waitress. "The blockage is mental. We must bypass the conscious mind." Mia's eyes locked on the syringe. She had spent 2 years in nursing school before she had to drop out to care for her sick mother. She knew standard sedatives, midazolam, diazepam. They were clear. The liquid in that syringe was orange. Whatever that is, Mia thought, panic rising in her throat. It's not a sedative. It's a stimulant. The security guard, a man with a neck the size of a tree stump, grabbed Mia's arm. "Let's go, sweetheart. You're done." "Wait," Mia said, her voice trembling but gaining volume. "Don't let him inject her." The guard laughed. "Quiet. Walk." "No." Mia dug her heels in, the glass crunching under her shoes. "Look at the syringe. That's not a sedative. That's adrenaline mixed with something else. He's going to induce a panic attack." The room was silent enough that her voice carried. Dr. Thorne paused, the needle inches from Patrick's arm. He looked up, an amused smirk on his face. "A waitress giving medical advice?" Thorne chuckled. "Arthur, your staff is hysterical." Arthur Sterling's face turned purple. "Remove her, now," The guard yanked Mia backward. She stumbled, her hand brushing against her apron pocket. Her fingers grazed the hard plastic edge of the object she had carried with her for 5 years. The object she never left home without. She hadn't planned to use it. She hadn't even known Patrick Sterling would be here. But fate, it seemed, had a twisted sense of humor. "Patrick!" Mia screamed, fighting the guard's grip. "Patrick, look at me! It's Mia! Camp Silver Lake!" At the mention of the camp, Arthur Sterling went rigid. It was a subtle reaction, a stiffening of the shoulders, but Mia saw it. Patrick didn't look at Mia. She looked at her father. And in that look, Mia saw the truth. It wasn't the accident that had silenced her. It wasn't the grief. It was him. The security guard, whose name tag read Bronson, dragged Mia toward the double doors of the kitchen. He wasn't gentle. His grip left bruises instantly. "Camp Silver Lake?" Bronson muttered near her ear. "You picked the wrong trigger word, lady. Mr. Sterling doesn't like people digging up the past." "Let me go." Mia stomped on Bronson's instep. He grunted, but didn't let go. He shoved her through the kitchen doors, away from the ballroom, away from the eyes of the guests. The kitchen was chaos, chefs shouting, steam rising, pans clattering. But Bronson didn't stop there. He dragged her past the prep stations toward the back exit that led to the alleyway and the dumpsters. "You're not just getting fired," Bronson growled. "You're getting a trespassing charge, maybe assault if you keep struggling." "He's going to hurt her," Mia gasped, trying to twist out of his grip. "That doctor is a fraud. I recognize him now. He's not Thorne. He looks like a man named Marcus Vane. He lost his license in Chicago for experimental shock therapy." Bronson stopped. He looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time. "Vane? You're crazy." "Google it," Mia pleaded, her chest heaving. "Please, I swear to you, if he injects that girl, her heart rate will spike. With her trauma, it could kill her." Bronson hesitated. He was a hired gun, sure, but he wasn't a murderer. He glanced back toward the ballroom doors. Meanwhile, back in the crystal ballroom, the show was continuing. Arthur Sterling smoothed his suit jacket. "Apologies, everyone. It seems we had a disturbance. Dr. Thorne, please, proceed." Dr. Thorne, or Vane, as Mia suspected, nodded. He turned back to Patrick. The girl was hyperventilating now. Her chest rose and fell in rapid, shallow gasps. Tears streamed down her face, ruining the perfect makeup, but she made no sound. Not a whimper. "Shh, shh," Thorne whispered, leaning in close. The microphone clipped to his lapel caught every wet, terrifying sound of his breath. "This will help you, Patrick. We need to break the wall. We need to shock the voice out of you." He grabbed her arm. Patrick flinched, pulling back, but Thorne was stronger. He jammed the needle into her deltoid muscle and depressed the plunger. The orange liquid disappeared into her vein. For 10 seconds, nothing happened. The room held its breath. Then, Patrick gasped. It was a dry, rasping sound. Her eyes rolled back in her head. She arched her back, her fingers clawing at the velvet arms of the chair. "Excellent," Thorne said, stepping back and addressing the crowd. "Her heart rate is elevating. The adrenaline is flooding the limbic system. The flight or fight response is overriding the psychological block. She will speak. She will scream." Arthur Sterling watched, his hands clasped behind his back. He didn't look like a concerned father. He looked like a man watching a stock ticker. Patrick began to convulse. "Speak," Thorne commanded. "Tell us what happened that night, Patrick. Tell us." Patrick's mouth opened. Her jaw worked furiously. But instead of words, a horrible, choking sound emerged. She grabbed her throat. Her face began to turn a dark, mottled red. "She's choking!" a woman in the front row screamed. "No, she's fighting it!" Thorne yelled over the rising panic of the crowd. "Let her work through it!" In the back hallway, Mia saw Bronson loosen his grip as the screams from the ballroom filtered through the heavy doors. "Did you hear that?" Mia hissed. "That's not a breakthrough. That's a seizure." Bronson cursed under his breath. He let go of Mia's arm. "Stay here. If you move, I'll break your legs." He ran back toward the ballroom. Mia didn't stay. She didn't run away either. She ran after him. She burst back into the ballroom just as chaos erupted. Patrick had slid out of the chair and was thrashing on the floor. Dr. Thorne was trying to hold her down, looking less confident now. Arthur Sterling was shouting at his security team to block the cameras, no photos. The guests were surging toward the exits, a stampede of silk and diamonds. Mia didn't run to the exit. She ran to the stage. She scrambled up the steps, ignoring the shouts of the confused security team. She dropped to her knees beside Patrick. Patrick was blue. She wasn't breathing. "Get off her!" Mia shoved Dr. Thorne with a strength she didn't know she possessed. The doctor toppled backward, surprised by the assault. "She's swallowing her tongue," Mia yelled. She jammed her fingers into Patrick's mouth, depressing the tongue, clearing the airway. It was messy. Patrick bit down hard, drawing blood from Mia's fingers, but Mia didn't pull away. "Breathe, Patrick! Come on!" Patrick gasped. A massive, ragged intake of air. The blue tint began to fade from her skin, replaced by a pale, clammy sweat. Her eyes focused. She saw Mia. For a moment, in the middle of the madness, the two girls locked eyes. "You," Patrick mouthed. No sound, just the shape of the word. "Get away from my daughter." Arthur Sterling was there now, his face a mask of rage. He grabbed Mia by the hair, yanking her back. "You ruined it. She was about to speak. She was about to die," Mia screamed back, tears of pain springing to her eyes as her scalp burned. "Look at her. Look at her pupils. They're blown. You let this butcher drug her." "I am the father," Arthur roared, throwing Mia to the floor. "I decide what is best. Security. Take this trash out and call the police. I want her charged with attempted murder." Bronson and two other guards descended on Mia. This time there was no hesitation. They hauled her up, her feet dangling off the ground. Mia looked at Patrick. The girl was curled in a fetal position, weeping silently. Arthur stood over her, not comforting her, but glaring at her with disdain. "You failed me again, Patrick," Arthur whispered, loud enough for Mia to hear. Something inside Mia snapped. It was the same feeling she had 5 years ago when she found the letters. The letters she had kept hidden. The letters that were currently in her apron pocket. "She didn't fail you, Arthur," Mia shouted, her voice cutting through the noise of the dying party. "She's protecting you," Arthur froze. He slowly turned to look at the waitress being dragged away. "What did you say?" The guard stopped, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Mia planted her feet. She reached into her apron. The guards tensed, reaching for their holsters, thinking she had a weapon. "Don't shoot!" Mia cried out. "It's just a recorder." She pulled it out. It wasn't a digital recorder. It was an old, battered Sony Walkman from the 90s. Yellow plastic, scratched and worn. Arthur's face went white as the table linens. "Where did you get that?" he whispered. "Camp Silver Lake," Mia said, her voice steady now. "Cabin 4, under the floorboards, where Patrick hid it the day before the accident." Mia held the Walkman up like a shield. "Everyone thinks Patrick lost her voice because of the car crash," Mia announced to the stunned room. The guests who hadn't fled were now frozen, watching this drama unfold. But that's a lie. She stopped speaking 3 days before the crash. She stopped speaking because of what she recorded on this tape. Dr. Thorne scrambled to his feet. "Arthur, don't listen to this lunatic. Let's get Patrick upstairs." "No." Patrick scrambled backward, away from her father, away from the doctor. She crawled toward Mia. Arthur lunged for the Walkman. "Give me that!" "Play it!" someone shouted from the crowd. It was the woman in the emeralds. "If you have nothing to hide, Arthur, let her play it!" Mia's thumb hovered over the play button. "You think you can restore her voice with drugs?" Mia challenged Arthur, her eyes burning. "The only way she gets her voice back is if the truth comes out. 21 doctors couldn't fix her. But this tape will." Arthur stopped it. He looked at the tape, then at the terrified face of his daughter, and finally at the defiant Waitress. "You have no idea what you're doing," Arthur said, his voice low and dangerous. "You pull that trigger and you destroy everything, not just me, her too." "She's already destroyed," Mia said. She pressed play. The silence in the ballroom was so heavy it felt physical. The only sound was the mechanical whir of the old Sony Walkman. It was a relic from a different era, a piece of yellow plastic that looked out of place in a room filled with high-end tech. Then, the audio hissed to life. There was the sound of wind, real, howling wind, and the distant sound of teenage girls laughing. "Is it on? Mia, is the red light on?" The voice that came through the speakers was young, bright, and full of life. It was Patrick's voice from 5 years ago. On the floor, the current Patrick let out a small, broken sob at the sound of her own ghost. "It's on, Patrick. Stop fidgeting," a second voice said. Mia's eyes filled with tears. That was her own voice, 5 years younger, carefree, before her mother got sick, before she had to work 3 jobs just to stay afloat. "Okay," the young Patrick on the tape said, her voice dropping to a conspiratorial whisper. "I'm recording this because I think my dad is doing something bad. Not business bad. I mean, really bad. I saw him in the study with Mr. Vance. They were talking about liquidating the assets in the Swiss accounts. And then they mentioned my mum's name. They said she was the last obstacle to the merger." A collective gasp rippled through the ballroom. Arthur Sterling stood like a statue, his face a mask of grey stone. "Patrick, you shouldn't say that into a microphone," the young Mia on the tape warned. "I have to, because tomorrow we're going to the Alps. He says it's a vacation, but I saw the itinerary. He's meeting with the board of directors there. Mia, I'm scared. If something happens to me or Mum, I want someone to know that it wasn't an accident. I'm hiding this under the floorboard. If you find this, it means I didn't come back." The tape ended with a sharp click. The ballroom was deathly silent. The accident in the Alps had been ruled a tragic mishap, ice on the road, a failed brake line. But the tape suggested something far more sinister. Premeditation. "It's a forgery," Arthur Sterling said, his voice cracking. "A cheap digital deepfake put onto an old cassette. This girl is an extortionist. Security, seize that device." But the guards hesitated. They weren't looking at Arthur anymore. They were looking at Patrick. Patrick had crawled to Mia's side. She reached out a trembling hand and touched the Walkman. Then she looked up at her father. For the first time in 3 years, the dead look in her eyes was gone. In its place was a burning, white-hot fury. She opened her mouth. Her throat worked. The sound was like sandpaper on wood. It was painful to hear. "Don't exert yourself, Patrick," Dr. Thorne, Vane, said, stepping forward with another syringe. "You're having a psychotic break. This waitress is poisoning your mind." "Get away," Patrick rasped. The room erupted. The guests weren't just onlookers anymore. They were witnesses to a crime. "She spoke!" someone shouted. "She actually spoke!" But Mia knew the truth wasn't fully out yet. The tape was just the beginning. She looked at Arthur. The brake lines didn't just fail, did they, Arthur? You weren't even in the car. You watched from the balcony of the chalet. You watched your wife drive off that cliff with your daughter in the passenger seat. "Silence!" Arthur screamed. He lunged at Mia, his hands reaching for her throat. Arthur Sterling had spent 30 years building an image of the perfect, untouchable titan of industry. In 10 seconds, that image shattered. As he lunged for Mia, Bronson, the guard who had previously been dragging Mia out, stepped in his way. He put a massive hand on Arthur's chest and shoved him back. "That's enough, Mr. Sterling," Bronson said. His voice was calm, but his hand was resting on his holster. "I think we should wait for the police." "You work for me," Arthur shrieked. "I pay your salary. I own the police in this town." "Maybe," Bronson said, looking down at Patrick, who was still clinging to Mia's apron. "But I don't get paid enough to cover up a murder." Dr. Vane saw the writing on the wall. He tried to slip toward the kitchen exit, but Mia noticed. "Don't let him leave," she yelled. "He's the one who helped Arthur facilitate the treatment to keep her quiet." 2 other catering staff members, inspired by the drama, blocked Vane's path. The doctor looked around like a trapped rat. "I was just a consultant," Vane shouted. "Sterling told me she was dangerous. He told me she had to be sedated for her own safety." Patrick stood up. She was shaky, her legs looking like they might give way at any moment, but she stood. She leaned heavily on Mia. She looked at her father, the man she had lived in fear of for 1,095 days, the man who had kept her in a gilded prison, surrounding her with doctors whose only job was to ensure she never regained her confidence. "You," Patrick said, her voice growing stronger with every breath. "You killed her." The word "her" hung in the air like a guillotine blade. Everyone knew she meant her mother, Evelyn Sterling. "Patrick, sweetheart, you're confused," Arthur tried to soften his tone, stepping forward with his hands out. "The trauma, it's playing tricks on you. This waitress, she's a grifter. She found that tape and she's using you." "I hid it," Patrick whispered. She turned to the crowd, her voice finally finding its resonance. "I hid the tape because I knew he would come for me next." She looked at Mia. "Thank you, Mia." The 2 girls, one a billionaire's daughter and one a penniless waitress, stood together in the center of the wreckage. Suddenly, the front doors of the manor burst open. It wasn't the police. It was a group of men in dark suits, federal agents. "Arthur Sterling," the lead agent announced, holding up a badge. "I'm Special Agent Miller with the FBI. We've been monitoring your offshore accounts for 18 months. We just received an anonymous tip with a digital upload of a certain audio recording." Mia looked down at her pocket. She had a second device, her smartphone. It had been recording the entire ballroom confrontation and streaming it live to a cloud server she'd shared with a contact at a major news outlet. "The waitress wasn't the only one recording tonight," Mia said, holding up her phone. Arthur Sterling looked at the agents, then at his daughter, then at the room full of New York's elite who were all recording him with their own phones. He realized there was no way out. No amount of money could buy back his reputation. No lawyer could erase the sound of his daughter's voice. He didn't fight as the agents moved in. He didn't say a word. He went out just like his daughter had been for 3 years, silent. As the FBI led Arthur Sterling and Dr. Vane away in handcuffs, the ballroom transformed from a gala into a crime scene. Yellow tape was stretched over the gold-leafed banisters. Mia sat on the edge of the stage, her apron stained with spilled wine and Patrick's tears. A paramedic was wrapping a bandage around her hand where Patrick had bitten her. Patrick sat beside her. She refused to let the paramedics take her to the hospital until Mia was cleared too. "Why?" Patrick asked. Her voice was still hoarse, but the clarity was returning. "Why did you keep it?" Mia looked at the yellow Walkman. "Because you were the only friend I had that summer. When you didn't come back to camp, and then I saw the news about the crash, I went back to cabin 4. I remembered you playing with the floorboards. I thought maybe you'd left a note. I found the tape, but I was 18, Patrick. I was a nobody. I tried to go to the police in Yonkers, but they told me I was imagining things. Then my mum got sick and I got scared. I kept it as insurance. I promised myself if I ever saw you again, I'd give it to you." Patrick gripped Mia's hand. "You didn't just give me a tape, Mia. You gave me my life back." "What will you do now?" Mia asked. Patrick looked around the hollow, expensive house. "Sell this place, every brick of it. My mother had a foundation for underprivileged girls. I think I'll start there, and I'm going to need a partner, someone who knows what it's like to be invisible." Mia smiled, a real smile for the first time in years. "I think I can find someone." The trial of the people versus Arthur Sterling was not held in a courtroom. It was held in a cathedral of judgment. The New York State Supreme Court building was besieged by satellite trucks and protesters holding signs that read, "Justice for Patrick." Inside, the air was thick with the scent of old wood, floor wax, and the palpable tension of a falling empire. Mia Calloway sat in the witness room, her hands folded in her lap. She was wearing a modest charcoal suit Patrick had bought for her. She looked like a different person than the girl who had dropped the champagne tray 6 months ago, but inside, her heart was still doing that same frantic dance against her ribs. The prosecution calls Mia Calloway to the stand. The doors swung open. Mia walked down the center aisle. To her left sat the press, pens poised like daggers. To her right sat the remnants of the Sterling Board of Directors, looking at her as if she were a virus that had wiped out their portfolios. And in the center, at the defense table, sat Arthur Sterling. He looked diminished. His expensive suit seemed too large for him now, and the silver hair was thinning. But his eyes, those cold, predatory eyes, were still fixed on her. Beside him sat a man who looked like a shark in a silk tie, Marcus Thorne, the doctor who had actually been a disgraced experimentalist named Marcus Vane. They were being tried together for conspiracy, endangerment, and in Arthur's case, the solicited murder of Evelyn Sterling. Mia took the oath, her voice a whisper that the court reporter had to ask her to repeat. "Miss Calloway," began the district attorney, a sharp-featured woman named Sarah Jenkins. "On the night of October 14th, you were employed as a temporary waitress for Elite Service Catering. Is that correct?" "Yes," Mia said, gaining strength. "And you brought an object into the Sterling Manor that night, an object that led to the arrest of the defendant. Can you identify this?" Jenkins held up a plastic evidence bag containing the yellow Sony Walkman. "That's mine," Mia said. "I found it 5 years ago." The cross-examination was where the blood began to flow. Arthur's lead defense attorney, Quentin Vance, was a man famous for making witnesses weep. He approached the stand with a predatory smile. "Miss Calloway, let's talk about your heroism," Vance sneered. "You held on to this tape for 5 years. You watched the news of the tragic accident in the Alps. You saw Patrick Sterling's suffering reported in every tabloid. And yet you didn't go to the FBI. You didn't go to the police. You waited until you were in a room full of billionaires to reveal your truth. Isn't it true, Miss Calloway, that you were waiting for the biggest possible payday?" No, Mia snapped. I was 18 years old and terrified. I went to the Yonkers precinct 2 days after the crash, and the officer at the desk told me I was a delusional kid trying to get a payout. I didn't have a lawyer. I didn't have a father with $1 billion to protect me. I had a sick mother and a part-time job. So you saved it, Vance countered. Like a winning lottery ticket? I saved it, Mia said, her voice ringing through the silent chamber. Because it was the only thing left of the girl I knew at camp. I didn't think anyone would believe me until I saw Patrick again. I saw that she wasn't just grieving. She was being drugged. She was being silenced in real time. I didn't choose that moment for a payday. I chose it because if I hadn't, Dr. Vane would have killed her with that injection. The courtroom erupted. The judge hammered his gavel, calling for order. But the real twist was yet to come. The defense's strategy was to prove the tape was a forgery. They brought in a world-class forensic audio engineer named Dr. Aris Thorne, by pure coincidence, the same surname as the fake doctor. Dr. Aris was a man of science, indifferent to the drama. I have analyzed the magnetic fluctuations on this tape, the expert testified, his voice projected over the sound system. The primary voices belong to a young Patrick Sterling and the witness, Mia Calloway. However, by applying a high-pass filter to the background noise, we discovered a secondary layer of audio. It appears the recorder was left running in a bag or a pocket after the girl stopped speaking. The room went cold. Arthur Sterling leaned forward, his knuckles white. "Play the enhancement," the judge ordered. The speakers hissed. It was the sound of a cabin door opening. The floorboards creaked. The very floorboards Patrick had hidden the recorder under. "Is the car ready?" A man's voice, muffled but unmistakable. It was Arthur Sterling. "The lines are prepped, Arthur," a second man replied. "The brake fluid will leak slowly. By the time they hit the hairpins in the St. Bernard Pass, the pedal will go to the floor. It'll look like a mechanical failure due to the cold." The gallery gasped. It was the smoking gun that didn't just suggest a crime, it detailed the mechanics of a murder. But the prosecution had one more question. "Dr. Aris," Jenkins asked, "have you identified the second voice, the man discussing the brake lines?" "We have," the expert replied. "We compared the vocal prints to every employee of the Sterling estate and the catering company. The voice belongs to William Henderson." The name hit Mia like a physical blow. Henderson, the manager who had hired her, the man who had been her boss for the last 3 months. The doors at the back of the courtroom burst open, but it wasn't a witness entering. It was a court officer announcing that William Henderson had been apprehended at JFK Airport, attempting to board a flight to Montenegro. 2 hours later, in a stunning turn of events, Henderson was brought into the court in shackles. He had waived his right to remain silent. He wanted a deal. He looked at Arthur Sterling with a mixture of loathing and fear. "He made me do it," Henderson sobbed from the stand, his composure completely gone. "I was the head of security for his logistics firm back then. He knew I had gambling debts. He told me if I didn't fix the car, he'd turn my markers over to the people I owed. I thought Patrick wouldn't be in the car. He told me it would just be Evelyn." "And why did you hire Mia Calloway?" Jenkins asked. Henderson looked at Mia, tears streaming down his face. "I saw her name on the application. I recognized it from the old camp records I'd had to scrub for Arthur years ago. I knew she was the counselor Patrick had been close to. I saw it as a sign. I was dying inside. Every time I saw that poor girl Patrick sitting there like a statue. I knew Mia was the only one who might have the evidence. I sent her to that party, hoping she'd do exactly what she did. I was too much of a coward to do it myself, so I used her." The betrayal was multi-layered. Arthur had betrayed his wife and daughter. Henderson had betrayed his soul. And even Mia's chance at justice had been a calculated move by a guilty man looking for a proxy to do his dirty work. The jury didn't need long. When the verdict was read, guilty on all counts, Arthur Sterling didn't move. He didn't cry. He looked at Patrick, who was sitting in the front row. For the first time in the entire trial, Patrick stood up. She didn't need a microphone. Her voice, though still slightly raspy from years of disuse, filled the vaulted ceiling of the courtroom. "You took my mother," Patrick said, her eyes fixed on her father. "You took my voice. You took my youth. But you couldn't take the truth. Because the truth doesn't belong to you. It belongs to the people who are brave enough to tell it." Arthur was led away in chains. As he passed Mia, he paused for a fraction of a second. He looked as if he wanted to say something, a curse, a plea, a threat. But he found he had nothing left. The billionaire was finally bankrupt. Mia walked out of the courtroom into a swarm of cameras. For the first time in her life, she didn't duck her head. She didn't try to hide. She felt a hand on her shoulder. It was Patrick. "It's over," Patrick whispered. "No," Mia said, looking at the horizon where the sun was setting over the city. "It's just starting." The final pieces of the Sterling Empire were being dismantled. The accounts were frozen, the properties seized. But as the two women stood on the courthouse steps, they realized they had something much more valuable than the billions that had been lost. They had the record, they had the memory, and most importantly, they had the future. Henderson's confession had been the final twist, the key that turned the lock on Arthur's cell. It was a reminder that even in the darkest conspiracies, the human conscience is a volatile thing. It can be buried, but it never truly dies. As they walked down the steps, Mia reached into her pocket and touched the yellow Walkman. It was just a piece of plastic, but it had been the lever that moved a mountain. "Where to?" Mia asked. "Somewhere quiet," Patrick replied, a small, genuine smile playing on her lips. "I think I've heard enough shouting for one lifetime." And for the first time in 5 years, the silence between them wasn't a prison. It was a peace. The grand finale of the Sterling saga did not take place under the flashing sirens of the arrest or the mahogany benches of the courtroom. It took place 6 months later, on a brisk October morning in Yonkers, in a place that smelled of fresh cedar and hope. The Evelyn and Patrick Center for Voice was a feat of architectural transparency. Unlike the Sterling Manor, which was built to hide secrets behind thick stone and soundproofed walls, this building was made almost entirely of glass. It stood as a literal manifestation of the truth, clear, unavoidable, and filled with light. Mia Calloway stood in the wings of the outdoor stage, her hands tucked into the pockets of a professional blazer. It felt strange not to be wearing an apron. For years, the weight of the silver tray had defined her posture. Now, the weight she carried was one of responsibility. She was the director of outreach for the foundation, a title she still struggled to say without stuttering. She looked out at the crowd. There were no cameras from the tabloid Prowler press. Patrick had banned them. Instead, there were families, parents holding the hands of children who, like Patrick once had, lived in the quiet shadows of trauma. "You're overthinking again," a voice whispered behind her. Mia turned to see Patrick. The transformation was staggering. The ghost girl of the Sterling estate was gone. Patrick's hair was no longer pinned in that rigid, artificial style. It fell naturally over her shoulders. She wore a simple navy dress, and for the first time, her eyes weren't searching for an exit. They were grounded. "I'm just thinking about the Walkman," Mia admitted, glancing toward the lobby where the yellow Sony sat in its climate-controlled case. I keep wondering, if I hadn't been assigned to that party, where would we be? Patrick stepped closer, her voice now a melodic, steady instrument. We'd be exactly where we were. I'd be a prisoner in my own head, and you'd be wondering, what if, for the rest of your life? But Henderson knew. He knew that out of everyone who worked for him, you were the only one who wouldn't be bought off. The mention of Henderson brought a shadow over Mia's face. The trial had revealed the full extent of the rot. Henderson, the catering manager, had been the one to drain the brake fluid from Evelyn Sterling's car under Arthur's orders. He had been a coward for 5 years, but seeing Mia, the girl from the camp records, apply for a job at his agency had sparked a late, blooming conscience. He hadn't just assigned her to the party, he had practically orchestrated the collision of their lives, knowing Mia was the only person who possessed the physical evidence to destroy Arthur. "He's serving 15 years, Mia said softly. "Do you forgive him?" Patrick looked out at the garden. "He gave me the key to my cage, even if he helped build the cage in the first place. I don't forgive him yet. But I'm grateful he chose you." A hush fell over the audience as the master of ceremonies announced Patrick's name. 5 years ago, Patrick Sterling's voice had been a secret. 3 years ago, it had been a myth. Today, it was a thunderclap. As Patrick walked to the podium, she didn't look at the teleprompter. She didn't look at the investors. She looked at a small 7-year-old boy in the front row named Leo, who hadn't spoken since a house fire a year prior. 3 years ago, Patrick began, her voice projected through the speakers with a haunting clarity. 21 of the most expensive doctors in the world told my father that I was broken. They used words like psychogenic mutism and irreversible neurological blockage. They looked at me as a puzzle to be solved, a malfunction in a billion-dollar machine. She paused, the silence no longer heavy, but expectant. They were wrong. I wasn't broken. I was suppressed. Silence isn't always a medical condition. Sometimes it's a survival strategy. When the world around you is built on lies, your voice becomes the most dangerous thing you own. So you hide it. You bury it so deep that even you can't find it. Mia watched from the side, tears pricking her eyes. She remembered the girl at Camp Silver Lake who used to sing "Landslide" by the campfire. This was that girl, grown up and forged in fire. I am standing here today because one person, not a doctor, not a specialist, but a friend, refused to let my silence be the final word. Patrick continued, gesturing toward Mia. Mia Calloway didn't have a medical degree. She had a memory. She had a yellow tape recorder. And most importantly, she had the courage to speak when it was easier to stay quiet. The applause was deafening. It wasn't the polite, rhythmic clapping of the ballroom. It was a roar of genuine human emotion. After the ceremony, as the guests wandered through the gardens, Mia found herself standing by a fountain dedicated to Evelyn Sterling. A man approached her, Detective Marcus Thorne, no relation to the fraudulent Dr. Thorne, the lead investigator who had finally put the handcuffs on Arthur Sterling. "Thought you might want to know," Thorne said, leaning against the stone rim of the fountain. Arthur's final appeal was denied this morning. He's going to spend the rest of his life in Sing Sing. He still hasn't said a word to his lawyers. I guess he's finally learning what it feels like to be silenced. Mia felt a strange lack of triumph. It doesn't bring Patrick's mum back. No, Thorne agreed. But look around. It brought all of this. You did good, kid. You stayed at that party when every instinct told you to run. Most people would have just dropped the tray and vanished. I couldn't, Mia said. I saw her eyes. I knew what was in them. As the sun began to set over the Hudson River, casting long, golden shadows across the lawn, Patrick joined Mia by the fountain. The crowd had thinned, leaving only the staff and a few lingering families. The board wants to talk about expansion, Patrick said, a tired but happy smile on her face. They want a center in Chicago and one in London. Slow down, Mia laughed. We just opened the doors here 2 hours ago. I've spent 3 years being slow, Mia. I've spent 3 years waiting. I'm done waiting. Patrick reached into a pocket and pulled out a small rectangular object. It was a new digital voice recorder. I want to start a new archive, Patrick said. Not of secrets, not of crimes. I want to record the first words of every child who finds their voice in this building. I want to fill a library with the sound of people coming back to life. Mia looked at the device, then back at the glass building glowing in the twilight. She thought about her own journey, from a girl in Yonkers afraid of an eviction notice, to a woman helping run a foundation that would change thousands of lives. What's the first recording going to be? Mia asked. Patrick hit the record button and held it between them. The first recording, Patrick said, looking directly at Mia, is a promise that we will never let anyone else's power be louder than our own truth. She handed the recorder to Mia. Your turn, Patrick whispered. Mia took a breath. The air felt cool and clean. She thought about the yellow Walkman, the broken glass of the ballroom, and the long road that had led her here. She thought about her mother, who had taught her that even if you're the help, you're never helpless. My turn, Mia said into the microphone, her voice steady and clear. My name is Mia Calloway. I used to be a waitress who was taught to be invisible, but today I'm standing in the light, and I'm not going anywhere. The two women stood together as the stars began to poke through the purple sky. The empire of Arthur Sterling had fallen, built on the shifting sands of greed and cruelty. But here, on this hill, a new empire was rising. An empire of sound, an empire of words. And as they walked back toward the glowing glass doors of the center, the only sound was the rhythmic click of their heels on the pavement, the sound of two people moving forward, leaving the silence behind forever. In the years that followed, the story of the billionaire's daughter and the waitress became a modern legend. It was taught in ethics classes and discussed in psychology journals. But for Mia and Patrick, it wasn't a legend. It was just the day they decided to stop being afraid. The yellow Walkman eventually became the center's logo, a symbol of the power of the little guy. And every year, on the anniversary of the party, Mia and Patrick would sit in the lobby, look at that scratched yellow plastic, and remember the moment the tray hit the floor, because sometimes you have to break a few things to let the truth finally ring out. They say silence is golden, but for Patrick Sterling, it was a prison. It took the courage of a woman who had nothing to lose to break the walls built by a man who had everything. This story reminds us that the truth doesn't care about bank accounts or social status. It only cares about being told. Mia Calloway went from serving appetizers to serving justice, proving that heroes don't always wear capes. Sometimes they wear an apron and carry a yellow Walkman. If this story moved you, show your support for the truth tellers. Hit that like button and subscribe to our channel for more unbelievable real-life dramas that prove truth is stranger than fiction. Don't forget to share this video with someone who needs to hear that their voice matters. What would you have done if you found that tape? Let us know in the comments below. Thanks for watching.